Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, before we begin for the afternoon session, a friendly reminder to all of you, please kindly switch your mobile phone to silent mode throughout the session. And also, however, please do feel free to take photos and remember to do the hashtag, okay? That is hashtag 13 WIEF. And of course, for information, this session will be conducted in English. So SIS devices are available at the entrance of the hall, which is on my right side, okay? And also the languages available will be in Arabic, in Mandarin, French, and Russian. All right, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, the Islamic finance market size is now within the range of 1.66 trillion US dollar to 2.1 trillion US dollar, with expectations of market size to be 3.4 trillion US dollar by the end of 2018. Yet, human resource capital and finance technology, which is they call it Fintech, have yet to commensurate this market boom. So what are the challenges and opportunities to Fintech in Islamic finance? For the panel discussion this afternoon, the prospect of Fintech in Islamic finance, ladies and gentlemen, joining us today, we have Dr. Andreas Hatzigeorgiou, the Chief Economist, Stockholm Chamber of Commerce, Sweden. And also we have Ms. Maimunah Abdul Aziz, the Chief Executive Officer of the M Investment Bank, Malaysia. And Yang berbahagia, Dato Dr. Azmi Omar, President and Chief Executive Officer of InSafe Malaysia. And also would like to introduce you to our moderator for this afternoon, Mr. Tang, the Managing Director of the Asia Capital Markets Institute of Hong Kong. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for our distinguished panelists and moderator for this afternoon session on the prospect of Fintech in Islamic finance. Dengan segala hormatnya, dipersilakan.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you had a wonderful lunch, and thank you very much for joining us for what promises to be a very interesting discussion. We already had quite a strong discussion in the green room already, so hopefully we can translate some of that here. It's a particular pleasure to be here to speak about Islamic finance in Malaysia, which in many rankings is top of the world. And based on my various meetings in the last couple of days, I've met with representation from Asia to the Middle East, Africa, and Europe. So you've heard some of the figures already. Thomson Reuters Global Islamic Economic Report reports that Islamic financial assets account for $2 trillion already. But that's merely 1% of global financial assets. The industry has yet to reach 100 million customers, but frankly, the captive market is many, many more times than that. And these are some of the opportunities that are out there. Some of the fantastic statistics are such that the growth in OIC countries are more than double that of advanced countries, and the population is really young. So this is the generation that really, relies on these things. So everybody's got a cell phone, right? And even the youngest in our communities. And so they now have access to the whole world of financial services out there. That, in combination with how Islamic finance and its basis in ethical finance and financial inclusion, I think makes this a really promising combination when you talk about Islamic finance and Fintech. We're really lucky today to have a wonderful panel here comprising of experts in the three main areas that you might think of in this evolving area. We've got an experienced practitioner, Ms. Rajate, at the end. Will you put your hands together for her, please? We've got a learned academic and policymaker, Dato Azmi, on my left-hand side. And we've also got a representative from a country which is a non-Muslim country, but one of the leading countries with a strong fintech presence, Andreas, right in the middle there. So since I will not be able to do them justice in terms of an introduction, maybe let me start ladies first right at the end. If Ms. Rajate, you could briefly introduce yourself and your background in relation to Islamic finance and fintech, please.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Good afternoon. Assalamu alaikum. I started out as an investment banker back in the early 90s, because that's where the money is to be made. And then after 10 years or so, I found that I had to, I discovered the whole concept of riba. And in my cause and attempt of redemption, I left the country and went to Bahrain and embarked my journey on Islamic banking. And several years after that, I came back and I had helped set up the world's first Islamic commodity Murabaha platform. And I led an Islamic bank, and now I'm leading a bigger group with the hope of adopting an Islamic first approach to my business. I just wanted to say that Brian mentioned about the size of Islamic banking assets being very small in comparison to the total global financial assets. So total global financial assets today is about 127 trillion. Our assets, Islamic, is 2 trillion. The world's largest bank, which is ICBC, is close to 4 trillion. So we're not even anywhere near the world's largest bank. We're not even anywhere near the 4th largest bank, which is also a Chinese bank. So we're kind of young in the context of global finance. And how do we then reach out to that network which had been built by the conventional finance over the last 100 over years? And which is why the adoption of fintech by Islamic financial institutions and Islamic finance in general is extremely compelling. If you take a retail bank, and we've had this conversation with people who aspire to set up Islamic banks in their country, if you were to start a new bank today, and you want to set up a whole brick and mortar distribution network, it's going to take you 100 years, and by the time you're done, people don't go to branches anymore. So the reality is the fastest way to reach out to as many people beyond borders is the adoption of financial technology. And however, I must say I'm a little bit uncomfortable with the concept of Islamic fintech, the way we seem to be maybe a little bit hung up on the term of Islamic fintech. The focus for Islamic finance is on fintech. Fintech in itself is technology, which is neutral. So the adoption of technology to further Islamic finance is what we ought to be focusing on. And then one day, now that everybody carries a mobile phone, that is going to be the strongest distribution network for Islamic finance. So banks, Islamic banks in particular, do not have an option not to adopt. That's the only way that Islamic banks or Islamic funds or Islamic crowdfunding can reach out is to adopt mobile technology.
Thanks so much for those wonderful opening remarks and throwing the gauntlet out there. So I'm actually based in Hong Kong, and in fact, I IPO'd ICBC. So we're in Hong Kong and China, it's really very progressive in terms of this space. So I just read in today's newspaper that WeChat is now coming to Malaysia. So WeChat has an incredible penetration in China, and it started, Jack Ma from Alibaba says, we're not fintech, we're tech fin. So the main competitors, the banks, and for those who are in financial service out there, it's not necessarily the banks, right? It's the tech companies now that have huge penetration because they have huge customer and client bases, because they understand the user mindset and access to customers. So thank you so much for that. Andreas, could you please introduce yourself?
Thank you, Brian. My name is Andreas Hatzigeorgiou. I'm the chief economist of the Swedish Chamber of Commerce. I have a background at the Foreign Ministry of Sweden, but also at the World Bank headquarters in Washington, D.C. It's so great to be here. It's my first time in Malaysia, and I'd like to take the opportunity to thank the WIEF for this great event. I have been really impressed by the high level of professionalism that has been shown thus far in this conference, which has been very successful and which I am confident will end in a successful way as well. So you might ask why a person and representative of Sweden and Stockholm is interested in the nexus between financial technology and Islamic finance. Before I get into that answer to that question, I will just give you a short brief of Stockholm and Sweden. And what you see on the screen here is a current picture of Stockholm. So you can see that the weather is a little bit different from Malaysia. Although we have, of course, very different weather, we share other types of characteristics. Economically, for instance, both Sweden and Malaysia is growing very fast, just as a large part of the Muslim world is growing very fast as well. Our economy is growing by 3% annually, which is impressive for a mature economy. Sweden is ranked as the most competitive economy in the EU. And Ryan, you showed a smartphone in your opening remarks. That came to think of asking the audience a question. Raise your hand if you ever made a Skype call. Skype. Yes, that's a large chunk of the audience. Raise your hand if you ever played Candy Crush Saga or Minecraft, for instance, the games. That's also a large chunk of the audience. And I bet that more of you actually have played those games, but maybe you're embarrassed to admit that. Those are just a few examples of Swedish inventions, Swedish digital inventions. Skype, Candy Crush Saga, which is made by the company King, Minecraft, which was sold just recently to Microsoft for a huge sum of money. And looking at those companies, those digital startups with a turnover above $1 billion US, and you count those and you compare what each country and each city has been able to produce in terms of these so-called unicorns, Stockholm is actually second to Silicon Valley in California, United States. So we pride ourselves for being at the forefront when it comes to the digital economy. We're also at the forefront when it comes to, like Brian, you said in your presentation, at the forefront of financial technology. If you look at the amount of investment going into financial technology globally and in Europe, you can really see that Sweden and Stockholm is at the absolute top. And if you change the slide, if I may. This is just a picture of the amount of investments going into financial technology in Europe over the past decade. And the pink part of the second part of the figure really shows the amount and share of investments going into financial technology just in the Nordic countries. So we are really punching above our weight when it comes to financial technology. And what's even more impressive is that if you look at 2014, which is the latest year for which we have data, only Sweden by itself was the destination for almost 1 in 5 euros of investments in financial technology in Europe during a single year. And if you come to think about what that means for a country that's only 10 million inhabitants compared to the UK, which you see to the left in this figure, which is a country of 65 million inhabitants, we are really punching above our weight. But coming back to the basic question then, why Islamic finance and why are we interested in Islamic financial technology? Yes, we are at the forefront. Yes, we attract a lot of investments in financial technology, but we are facing serious challenges because the global competition is fierce. It's absolutely fierce. And just recently, Scandinavia's biggest bank announced that they would move their headquarters from Stockholm, Sweden. So we are facing tremendous pressure in actually reinventing ourselves. We are facing the challenges of disruption in fact, which is the overall theme of this conference. And I am convinced that we need to open up and be more open and curious about the potential of Islamic finance in order to stay competitive, in order to promote business, promote jobs, promote growth. Sweden alone has over 600,000 Muslims, but no Islamic financial products. And we pride ourselves also in being very sustainable, in promoting sustainable ethic finance, but we haven't been able to realize that Islamic finance is, according to some at least, per definition, ethical. So that's my overall conclusion, that we can be more open and we can be more welcoming to the ideas permeating Islamic finance. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Andreas. Later on, you'll have to share with us what the secret sauce is for the creativity that comes out of Sweden. But just looking at that chart there, I was curious, is most of that, it's very impressive, so is most of that money private investment or is it public investment?
A majority, an absolute majority of those money, those investments are private.
Very good, thank you. And last but not least on our panel, we have Dato Azmi, who's I guess just returned to Malaysia after distinguished career elsewhere as well. So we'd love to hear some of your background. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian, fellow members. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and good afternoon to all of you. I came from two backgrounds. And the first, I was in Development Bank, Islamic Development Bank in Saudi Arabia for the last 6 years. And I came back to Malaysia just a month ago to head INSIAF, the Global University for Islamic Finance Education. Coming back to the issue of Fintech and Islamic finance, this is a very interesting topic and very current. For example, if you look at the number of studies being made, plus the work that I've done when I was with Islamic Development Bank, Jeddah in Saudi Arabia, is that you will see there's a large segment of Muslims who refuse to participate into the banking sector. And one of the reasons is because of religious reasons. They do not want to receive as well as pay interest because they believe that interest is riba, therefore Muslims are not allowed to be involved either as customers or as borrowers of the conventional banking system. And this is done across many countries. A number of surveys has been done. I think one of the most recent surveys is Fintech survey, and that was last year in 2015, 2016. And more than 50% of people in North Africa, in Africa, in the GCC, Southeast Asia, and Central Asia, do not want to participate because of the religious issues or religious objections. So then, even if we establish Islamic bank in one particular country, the market may be small. As an example, of course, Malaysia, we have about 30 million population, and Muslim is about close to 60%. But you find in other countries, I give a simple example. Recently, before I came back to Malaysia, we were working with Suriname. As you know, Suriname is a country in South America. It has a population of less than 1 million and a Muslim population of about slightly close to 300,000. And there's a plan to establish an Islamic bank. And you know that having an Islamic bank with a small population, the question would be the issue of viability of that bank alone. However, if we utilize Fintech, that would be one way where we can increase the financial inclusion, bring Muslims into the financial sector using Fintech as one of the tools. So my work before and now currently also, we're looking at how do we use Fintech to support Islamic, not banking per se, but Islamic financial institutions to bring more people into the financial sector. I think that's one of the critical things. Apart from the banking sector, we also need to look at, as being mentioned earlier on, the issue of charities and so on. We have not been able to utilize the other Islamic financial components in the form of zakat, wakaf, sadaqah. These are economic what we call it, pillars that we can use to support the development of Islamic economy in general. Hence, utilizing fintech is one of the tools there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So again, I'm part of the Hong Kong Fintech Association there, and we have a committee specifically on financial inclusion. So I think that really is one of the promises of fintech per se. It's financial inclusion across the board. So Ms. Rajate, you've been a great proponent and active participant in driving some of these digitalization changes previously in Hong Leong and now in AmBank. Can you speak to some of the initiatives that you've introduced there? I mean, part of the challenge is the mindset within the bank and the stakeholders, but also the customers. Perhaps you can share some of your practical on-the-ground experience in relation to pushing some of those changes.
I don't know how many bankers are there here. I just wanted to say that I noticed that globally a lot of huge banks and senior leadership of banks have essentially looked at digital disruptions in banking a little bit like the taxi drivers at Uber, It's like they're upset and then they continue to live in denial. I think for a lot of banks, it's because of the heavy investment in legacy systems. And this is really ironic. Banks are actually the biggest users of technology. We spend a lot of money on technology. But because of the money we had spent, we seem to be unable to migrate. And we're not as agile. And I think this is where the challenge lies, largely with banks. If you take all the banks that I've worked for, and I've worked in a few, the decision to change the approach from credit to risk is very difficult from the mindsets of traditional bankers. So then you have this bunch of new guys who are not bankers, who have looked at financial services as purely just another business. They've approached it from a customer experience perspective, as opposed to how we approach it from largely a regulatory perspective. So you have people like Atom Bank. I mean, it's in the UK, but if you have the opportunity to open an account with Atom Bank, I actually calculated that it took me 6 minutes. And I didn't have to talk to anybody. And it literally asked me 3 fields. In Malaysia, you have 16 fields and several forms and a requirement to see face-to-face KYC. So we are still caught between regulatory confines as well as our inability to say that you can do it differently, and you can still ensure that KYC is done. So my biggest challenge is I used to have a chart. I wanted to put it up here. The organizational chart of a bank usually has at the top chief killer idea, and chief skeptic officer. And pretty much the whole org chart is made out of people who feel that we're not really being disrupted just as yet. So in all fairness, all Malaysian banks I know and most banks around the world and foreign banks that I know attempt to digitize bits of their business, digitizing existing processes, but not quite taking one step back and crafting a digital experience. So we are unable to provide like what Atom Bank has been able to do in terms of account opening and onboarding of customers. Neither are we able to do what Cabbage has done in the US for micro SMEs. So Cabbage is a brilliant platform, which is, I'm trying to copy-paste. So no great ideas, just trying to copy-paste that in my digital garage. It's a platform that provides micro SME lending using algorithm financing model. What it does is that it takes data from cash in for the merchant and cash out data. So for instance, Cabbage specifically gets data from PayPal. So the micro SME guy gets money from its customers through PayPal and pays money to its suppliers via PayPal. And because it has a whole chain of data in, data out for its cash in and cash out, you can build a credit profile using the data. That's what you do with big data, essentially. And from that, they ran an algorithm, and then they're able to actually lend money to micro SMEs. So they will know exactly how much you're able to borrow, and at what point in time you can generally repay. This is something that large commercial banks have failed to do because the cost of undertaking micro lending is just not profitable for us. It's expensive, and for us to give out money, 10,000, 20,000, you still have to go through the entire credit process, or you have to hire a lot of people. In countries like Indonesia, those who undertake micro lending actually have a pair of legs within 15 kilometers radius. So the adoption, at this point in time, I'm working with a telco because we don't have PayPal data. I'm working with a telco who has a wallet, who has their own set of merchants, whose clients make payments to them using QR code. It's very infant stage in Malaysia, nowhere near like China, so it's still at incubation stage. So the idea is to get data from their cash-in customers, and for the small little merchants to use a mobile cash management system that will allow us to read data on how they spend money. From there, I hope that we will in time be able to build an algorithm financing model that can facilitate payment to micro SMEs, really at a touch of a button. And particularly in Malaysia, with the introduction of the new Companies Act, if you're a private company, you're not compelled to file in your accounts anymore. So if you're a small guy, I really cannot assess your creditworthiness from your financial accounts. And so this is where, in terms of financing from an Islamic finance perspective, when you talk about financial inclusion, how do you include the small guy if you have no access to them, or you have nowhere to assess them? So the way to access them and the way to assess them is actually to use financial technology. I also echo Jack Ma. I heard him speaking when he said that we're tech-fin. I feel the same. We're actually technology applied into finance. So that's one of the things that we're working on.
Fantastic. I actually...
Brian, can I just comment on, because I think this is so interesting what was said before on financial inclusion and then the potential of digitalization. In fast-growing countries and cities, we tend to see issues on the housing market. Difficulties in finding financing for a house loan, for instance. This problem is exacerbated in Sweden because the country and the economy is growing very fast, so demand on housing is going up. In addition to that, we have a very ineffective housing market where it's very difficult for people to find rental apartments. So for instance, if you're new to the country, it's basically impossible to find a rental apartment. You have to buy your apartment. And the third aspect to this is, of course, that a lot of the newcomers to the country are from Muslim countries. So with the existing financial products, the ineffective housing market creates a need, perhaps, for Islamic financial products and also a potential for Islamic financial technology, where we can solve a lot of the issues relating to problems of people not being able to find a home, for instance. If we can adjust and adapt to these changes. So that's where also I think that Islamic finance and Islamic financial technology has a role to play.
Thank you. I'll add to that. See, I see three opportunities for fintech in Islamic finance. As alluded by Brian earlier on, if you look at the global population, Muslims population is about 1.3 billion, about that. And if you drill down further, you will see that the bulk of the population are within the range of 15 to 25 years old. these are the individuals who are very, much focused on using fintech, using mobile phone for their applications. They are very adaptive in using those technologies. So that's one big segment of the population who are willing to experiment using new things. So this is one way where fintech, Islamic fintech, or fintech for Islamic finance can be a great opportunity. That's one factor. The other factor is, again, looking at the Muslim world, the OIC countries, you will see that slightly more than 50% of the population are women. So there are 15 to 25, and the bulk of them are women. And in some countries, women are not as mobile as in Malaysia, Indonesia, for example. I mean, I work in Saudi Arabia for the last 6 years. It's difficult for women to go out because of the cultural issues. So they need a driver to go out because they can't drive. Only next year they can drive. But again, this restricts their movement. Again, it shows you there are opportunities of using fintech for this segment of population. And the third factor is, which is not so good thing to say, but again, more than 80% of the world's refugees are Muslims. And the migration is from the south to the north. Not only in terms of formal migration, refugees, but also illegal migrants. And they need to send money back to the home country. Think about the payment. Think about the technology that you can use to send payment back to the home country. Obviously, they will not be able to use a bank, but using fintech, they will be able to transmit their money from whichever place, maybe in Sweden, to transfer back to the home country. So given these three factors alone, you will see that there is a big demand for fintech that uses Islamic finance. And most of the Muslims are very concerned. As I mentioned earlier on, they're very concerned that those applications meet Sharia compliance. That's the other segment of the banking part. The other part is, just to relate back to Andreas said, when I was in IDB also, we worked with Muslim communities in Sweden to develop wakaf. Wakaf, as you know, is an endowment system or trust system where Muslims would like to create a fund for the benefit of other Muslims. And most of the refugees in a number of countries, they tend to be very smart in doing business. So once they start to do business, they want to do the payment, remittances, but at the same time, they want to leave something to their community. Most of the thing, or one of the first few things they will do is they will create a school for the Muslims, and mosques. So immediately, they need to create that wakaf. So there's also another component where you can develop wakaf, you can develop zakat for Muslims in other countries, not only in Muslim majority countries. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that sharing. I try to encourage people to think about the KYC issue. So very often if you work in a financial institution or you try to use one, KYC is one of those really painful things. But with eKYC and biometrics, it really can be a customer acquisition tool. And that's one way you should really think about how fintech can help you. It can access more customers for your services, more customers for the financial goods. And linked to what Dato Azmi was just talking about, I was always pleased to hear that Malaysia is one of the forefront of crowdfunding and P2P adoption, and that and that's one of the fintech initiatives which really is quite consistent with Sharia principles. So I think there is a terminology you've heard already about Islamic finance, but really a lot of them link back to inclusion and link back to ethical finance as well. Now, Ms. Rajate, you've already talked about AI. You've talked about some of the analytics. We haven't talked about blockchain. So now, in terms of blockchain and as a tool, I think there's another panel specifically addressing that. But maybe we can speak a little bit, especially it relates to trade finance, but perhaps if you could speak a little bit more about the cryptocurrency side of things. I understand, for example, some of the central banks are thinking about blockchain to back their own digital currencies. But there are also different initiatives that are looking at asset-backed blockchains and the like. Perhaps you could speak, coming from the investment banking side, how are you all trying to deal with and address the issue of cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, but also the more than 1,000 that have been issued this year so far?
Actually, I think we need to kind of split the whole concept of distributed ledger technology, blockchain, and cryptocurrency. It's two different things. So my keenness is actually the ledger that supports the cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrency, in my view, and it's still very early days yet, could be used alongside fiat currency. You could. My view is that I don't think the regulators ought to ban it. I think they ought to regulate it. But what they ought to not allow is the trading of these currencies. So therefore, it has become a speculative tool. It could be very useful as a means of exchange. It's quite borderless and it becomes a universal currency. So setting that aside, you really got to see how that evolves. But on blockchain and distributed ledger technology, I cannot reiterate enough how the world will change with the use of DLT. Because if you take something like trade, and there's a very essence of Islamic finance, in the Quran, in Surah Al-Baqarah, that's exactly what we're allowed to do, and what we're only allowed to do is trade and not riba. And to facilitate trade in a highly connected world, very complex with the issues of KYC and the issues of AML, the use of distributed technology will actually allow us to protect all of these. One is to cut down manual processes, of course. And number two, you actually will know the origin and destination of money. And in terms of fraud, in terms of KYC and AML, that's half of the middle office that you carry is already covered. And in terms of fraud, again, today, for those of you who do invoice financing, there are very smart people around who can use the same invoice and get financing 3 times. But if you put it on the ledger, it is not possible because it's a decentralized ledger. That's the beauty about distributed ledger technology. It is not a central repository. It is a decentralized book. And you cannot actually alter it retroactively, because if you want to do that, you actually have to touch through the entire chain, and you would need collusion of an entire network because it's highly encrypted. And you can change smart contracts from anywhere around the world, multiple cities at multiple destinations. So the use of distributed ledger technology is crucial, in my view, for us to move forth in terms of trade finance. The very essence of Islamic finance is trade. In whichever form, whichever contract, the underlying contract that you use, it can be facilitated by the use of DLT. So in Malaysia, a few of us are coming together, a few of the bigger banks. We're sitting together trying to figure out what we would like to do. As you know, even in the US, it's still trials. No one has actually used it. But some banks have started to do it bilaterally with their clients. So they have bilateral agreements using distributed ledger, which is something I'm currently experimenting again in my small little digital garage. The reason why it's small is always very difficult to get funding to do digital stuff in a bank, because banks generally, my CFO will ask me what's the ROI after 3 months. So small little garage. I'm experimenting with my clients to use distributed ledger technology for the issuances of bank guarantee. It is not financing upfront, but again, for those of you who are in the banking industry, you will know how manually intensive it is to issue a bank guarantee and how many people are involved and how many times these documents are being pushed to and forth. So I hope with everyone within the industry trying to do a little bit of everything, that we will eventually move. Because I don't know whether there's a right time to say it, Brian, but I honestly believe, and it's my prediction, and I don't know whether I'm right, but in 20 years' time, we can have this conversation whether my prediction is right. One time, there were many, many banks in this world, and then they consolidated to become really big banks, and then came the crisis, and then everybody got really upset about these too big to fail kind of banks. And then came the whole new capital and liquidity and compliance structure, as well as financial disruption. the cost of running a licensed conventional commercial bank is extremely high. And I predict that with the event of financial technology or technology finance, what you will see is perhaps breaking up of some of these products into vertical pillars, because the fintechs are not interested in the whole suite of what the banks have got to offer. They're not interested in the least profitable side of the business. We can keep that. What they want is the most profitable, least capital intensive business like remittance, collections, and payments. That's what fintechs are keen on. And that is the bits that will be chipped off from the main banks. And that is when so my suspicion is eventually there will be breakups perhaps of these huge, large financial institutions into vertical pillars. And once that happens, you will then see the push towards technology like distributed ledger, because you need to talk amongst yourselves even more so. And you don't have a centralized risk or credit unit anymore. So, I don't know, maybe 20 years from now, let's catch up and see whether my prediction comes true.
Let's catch up in 5.
Cryptocurrencies, I'm very enthusiastic about this technology. It's especially interesting in the context of sort of Scandinavian context, a highly digital economy. And I know that mobile and internet penetration is also very high in Malaysia. So what I've noticed during the few days I've been here is that this is a theme that's gaining a lot of momentum here as well. But Sweden globally is the only country where the nominal demand for banknotes and coins is actually falling. And we're at the top of the league when it comes to the number of transactions, electronic transactions per person per year. So it would be interesting, I think, to look at how the incumbents in this type of market, and the incumbents here are the big banks and of course the central banks, are dealing with the disruption of the cryptocurrencies that we're seeing. The Swedish central bank, which is called the Riksbank, is the world's oldest central bank. And there are a lot of us that have been pushing for the need to have a revamp of the way we look at national currencies for a while. And I'm very glad to know that the Swedish central bank has actually opened up a discussion of introducing an electronic national currency. I know a few other countries are looking at this as well. And this can be also a way to democratize finance and access to the financial system. And we were talking about this before, relating to Islamic finance. For the Muslim world, there's no common currency, right? There are pockets of currencies that are being traded in these quite isolated markets. Perhaps cryptocurrency can bridge those previous gaps.
Sorry, Brian, you know, we had this conversation about the gold dinar once. We were thinking about using the dinar as an Islamic currency per se. So rather than having something physical, like what Andreas is saying, is that really that's it, cryptocurrency. It's gotten a lot of bad publicity, and which is why a lot of central banks are uncomfortable. But that is because of the trading of these currencies. It's no different than the financial crisis back in 1997. And when you allow it to become a speculative tool, then it goes out of hand. So maybe as a start, I don't know if there are any regulators in the room, you know, you could look at it as in parallel with a fiat currency, but maybe not allow the trading of it per se for speculative reasons, just like how Germany had actually banned the trading of credit swaps, and because it was purely speculative, and it doesn't help at all the real economy. So.
This can open a... Okay. I have 2 questions actually as follow-ups, Dr. Azmi. So one is in relation to the crypto and blockchain. Would love to hear your thoughts. But the second one, again, provocatively, we've heard about how the banks are going to be changed. So how are you training the future bankers to prepare them for this, this journey?
Thank you. A very interesting question. But before I go into that, let me just add a bit on this issue of cryptocurrency. A few weeks back, ISRA organized a one-day event on fintech, and there was also a discussion on cryptocurrency. Is cryptocurrency Sharia compliant or not? Very interesting. There were a couple of views. So one view is that cryptocurrency is a medium of exchange. So as a medium of exchange, then it can be used like a normal currency. But then the question is it mal, or from perspective of, is it a financial asset? Does it fit into that classification? Here again, unlike money issued by government, that is a legal tender. Cryptocurrency is not. So is it then Sharia compliant or not? The answer is the judgment is still out there. I think although personally I have read some of the arguments that some people are saying that cryptocurrency is Sharia compliant. What is not Sharia compliant, as being mentioned earlier on, is the issue of trading, highly speculative activity. So one way to make it Sharia compliant is, of course, to ban the trading. Therefore, then cryptocurrency can be used for transaction purposes, for trade, and so on. That's one. The other one is coming back to all this development of fintech, cryptocurrency, distributed ledger, and so on. As a university that's established by the Central Bank of Malaysia, focusing on Islamic finance, but we also see that apart from Islamic finance, the halal economy is a big segment of the world economy now. So what we're doing now is that we are also now changing our curriculum, the content, keeping pace with the development, so that our graduates will be able not only to understand, but also to contribute to this development, in the new development. I'll give you a simple example. Just a few days ago, I was in Turkey, speaking in Muscat. Muscat is the association of Muslim businessmen in Turkey. If some of you know, they are known as the Anatolian tigers. Those those manufacturers that produce and export products outside the region. And Muscat is also very keen to develop the halal economy and halal finance. But however, because Turkey, there is some sensitivity in terms of using the word Islamic, they use the term called humanist finance. They used to have a term called participation finance, but now there is a movement to go beyond participation finance, to call it humanist finance, just to respond to our earlier discussion just now. So the question is then Islamic finance equivalent to humanist finance? I would say this. I would say that in order to prepare our graduates for the global halal economy, is to focus on what we call ethical finance, sustainable finance. See, at the end of the day, there is a lot of commonalities between sustainable development goals, the SDGs, the Equator Principles, the United Nations Principles of Responsible Investment. All of these are important components that considers environment, that considers society, that considers community. As an example, people like Rajati will not finance a project that destroys the environment. I'm sure she would not do that. As an Islamic bank, we are concerned about the environment. And in Malaysia, under the value-based intermediation, we talk about protecting people, planet, and profit. So the important thing is that if you see, Islamic finance cuts across the ethical, responsible finance. It is very much concerned about how the next generation will live, how the planet will survive if we continue under the current situation. Hence, even in the context of producing graduates in universities, we are incorporating all these elements so that our graduates will be ethical, will be keeping abreast with the recent development, and also taking into account what we say the latest technology in financial services industry. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for that.
Can I just briefly add to that, Brian? I think that's such a useful aspect, and I think something that I will take back to my home country when we talk about Islamic finance as being a complement to and actually in line with completely compatible with ethical and sustainable finance. And Sweden and the Nordics, as you might know, is world leading when it comes to sustainability. 99% of our waste is actually being recycled today. 99%. And we come to the point where we actually import waste and garbage from other countries because we've been able to because we've been able to reuse these types of landfills into actual resources. So I would love to see Islamic finance going into financing these types of projects that are both commercially viable and ethical and sustainable.
And here's another challenge for you too, because the Nordic pension funds are one of the largest in the world and are very strong on the ESG investment side, including in ESG and impact investing. So to the extent that they're willing and able to enter into this space with that lens and framework, that'll be wonderful. I wanted to also touch briefly upon the trading, and perhaps we'll chat about this next time. You know, I'm working with some initiatives with the exchanges that do the cryptocurrency trading and trying to introduce listing rules which make them more similar to equity capital markets. So then, therefore, it's less about speculation. It's about funding real companies trying to build real tools for our society. I'd like to now turn it over to the audience. As you've heard, all of the panelists have got very strong views, and I think we'll take on nearly any question that you may have. So, any takers, please? There are mics, I think, that should be floating around. The microphones. So, any questions? It's the post-lunch time. Well, maybe I'll, in the interest of time, throw it out to the, oh, there's another one. Let me throw something to the panelists. So AI is often mentioned in the context of, you know, how technology is changing and the like. So, quick rapid fire. AI, are you with Zuckerberg, which says that everything will be good? Are you with Musk, which says, watch out for the killer robots?
Or with Steve Wozniak, who says that we shouldn't care because it's not going to happen.
That's right. so Ms. Rajachan.
Well, we are so far behind. If you look at the financial industry, I think in terms of the whole evolution, we're so far behind. But the use of cognitive technology, I think for a start, would be to replace the manual processes in terms of facilitating KYC. I hate to say it, that's the most sexy thing about banking today is compliance and compliance. So the use of cognitive technology is crucial to pick out these things. But if you can just give me 2 minutes before I don't get a chance to say it, the reason why the whole fintech concept is crucial for Islamic finance. And I say the word Islamic finance and not Islamic banking, is the very thing with fintech is it allows you to access into the financial market, and for financial services providers to provide a service to people without going through the banking system. This is, as always, you know, when you talk about Islamic finance, it's always synonymous to two things: the sukuk market, which is the capital markets, and then Islamic banking as a whole. And that is not fintech. You know, we employ or deploy the use of financial technology. But if you take these standalones like the likes of Cabbage, like the likes of even Atom, imagine if you are Atom Bank. You would be able to onboard customers overnight without having to set up any branches at all. And you'd be able to be kind of competitive in your returns because of your low cost setup. You don't need to buy a $30 million core banking system. I think it's $100 million now, I think, core banking system. You don't have to do all those things. Crowdfunding, which I didn't get a chance to say, in itself is a concept of musharaka, which is profit sharing, or mudaraba. So there are various routes to offer or do Islamic finance. And by going through the route of fintech, you can get to offer or introduce Islamic finance to your country a lot quicker. Like for you, Andreas, if you say you want to introduce Islamic finance through the banking system, you will need a lot of rules to be changed. Your government, your central government would have to provide liquidity management tools, and they would have to provide liquid assets which are Sharia compliant, which makes it very difficult unless you have the kind of support like Malaysia, where we have a parallel interbank market. So the alternative to that is look at the substance over form. So it could be crowdfunding, again, everything electronic use, it could be use of digital wallets for payments and collections. Funding or micro-lending like Cabbage is not a bank. You don't need that kind of heavy capital investment. So the whole concept of fintech in Islamic finance is even more compelling, because you should not only think of banking as that only route, or capital markets as that route to offer Islamic finance. Well, actually, you know, I mean, if Google, for instance, right, if the likes of Google or PayPal decide to say, I'm going to offer something Islamic, can you imagine, overnight, they're reaching out to 200 million people?
So can you imagine that this is the CEO of a bank saying the future of finance is no bank, right?
Yes, I told my children not to do banking.
It's like lawyers telling their children not to do law as well. So,
yes. I mean, I just like to echo what Rajati mentioned earlier on. I'm looking beyond banking. You see, there are other components of Islamic finance. We tend to focus on banking, sukuk, favorite topic, takaful. Those are the favorite topics, and the capital market. Now I think we should be looking at other aspects of Islamic finance, the likes of wakaf, zakat, sadaqah. Just imagine before, we have problems of, let's say we want to fund a certain project in a poor country. We do not have the ability to do that. But now with a crowdfunding platform, you know that your charity, your sadaqah, or your zakat will go towards alleviating poverty in this particular individual, in this particular location, in a particular country. See, my experience before, when I was in Malaysia, before joining IDB, I didn't figure out, you know, how do we define a school? Malaysian school, we tend to define X number of classrooms, you know, with that kind of facilities. Working in IDB, went to Africa, a school means a 2-classroom building. That's a school. With ground, the floor. I mean, the floor is not cemented floor. It's just sand or ground. And it's covered with a thatched roof. And that's a school, their definition. So you, as a development economist, you think, how can you help those poor people? Of course, the big development economists will come, okay, let's create the funding, provide financing to the country concerned, project finance, build X number of schools. But how do we, as a grassroots individual, support the development of that kind of individual? So to me, crowdfunding platform is the way to go. Okay, we know that we are going to put our money as zakat or as sadaqah charity, and it will go to that specific project, to that specific schools. And you can see the progress over time. I remember when I gave money to Darfur through a friend of mine, he showed me a 2-classroom school, and because of the contribution by friends, they now have 12 classroom schools. 12 classrooms, just imagine, in Darfur, in Africa, with cemented blocks and so on. So at least you can see that, yes, the money is being used. So having a crowdfunding platform, you have a third party that verifies that thing. So you know the money that you're going to give goes to that particular project or to that particular school. I think this is one of the ways that Islamic finance can show that it is not only for middle class, but it is also for even the low income individuals. And to the issue of, again, the poverty. How do you address poverty alleviation, if not through zakat, sadaqah? One of the work that we look at is, for example, in the context of microfinance, see, we always provide financing through loans or under Islamic murabaha. But we can also think about how do we build capacity of the borrower. So that capacity of the borrower can be done through crowdfunding. How? Through zakat and sadaqah. So capacity development through zakat and sadaqah can be used. And this is, again, not going against Sharia principle, but this is part of the Sharia principle to build capacity of individuals in order to do business. So when we now have the murabaha financing, the typical financing under microfinance, we now have zakat being used to build capacity, and to a certain extent also for capital, we can even use wakaf for capital purposes. So creating a wakaf to fund microfinance. as a capital of microfinance. So in this way, you're able to alleviate poverty and also bring a better world. At the end of the day, everyone wants to have a better world, because that will also reduce the issue of terrorism that we have now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think you've heard that we're all of the same mind here. We all agree that this is a wonderful platform to promote ethical and sustainable finance, but also an inclusive way to reach out to all the communities, individuals that don't have this access. So if I can, as we close out the session, maybe ask each of the panelists,
can I have...
what do you see one of the biggest challenges of seeing this goal that we're trying to promote here, and then how do you think that can be addressed? Maybe starting here.
Of course, from the banking industry, we have our own problems. So the biggest challenge, I think, for a bank is to change our mindset and re-engineer ourselves as we have legacy systems and credit and risk structures which are, entrenched. So I think that is really the biggest challenge for us. But also in terms of Islamic finances, we continuously, at least this is what I'm faced with continuous conversations of differences in opinion as opposed to the things that we agree on, and one of the biggest issues still to this very day is the concept of murabaha versus musharaka mudaraba. And then some purists feel that, we really ought to just do away with tawaruk and murabaha because that's not pure enough, and that you should adopt musharaka and mudaraba as the only concept of Islamic finance. That is, at least in Malaysia, one of my biggest challenges. So pushing ahead, every time I push something which has the use of murabaha, you kind of get pushed back and say, we're no different than conventional finance. We really ought to move away from murabaha and look into the really other end of the dial, which is musharaka. So I hope there will be greater understanding by practitioners of Islamic finance and those who wish to embark on this, that all of these contracts are within the ambit of permissibility. They're just different ends of your risk dial, and that's really it. And I think if we can land on that, then we can have multiple solutions to our product suite.
Can I have one question from the floor? Here, I'm here. Hello.
Hi, sorry.
Okay, the only question from the floor, okay? Please. Thank you very much. I'm Ahmad Lukman from Irshad HR Consulting, Kuala Lumpur. I have my own small experience with dinar dirham. I bought 2 dinar to test whether this fintech and whatever you call it works or not. So after buying 2 dinar early this year, just to share my experience, I managed to get after 200 plus, and now this month I got 280 from 2 dinars. 1 dinar is worth 800 ringgit Malaysia, 1 dinar. So I'm reaping some benefit after testing dinar dirham with 2 dinars. So my question is there any regulating body, an international regulating body, because this fintech, Bitcoin, and so on, it cuts across boundaries, So do you have we need to have an international, maybe there's already one, international body, regulatory body to regulate fintech, Bitcoin, and so on and so forth. Is there one? Thank you.
There is no single international body that actually oversees the cryptocurrency and the management of cryptocurrency. What central banks around the world currently is doing is they're thinking about regulating it. Some are nervous and they're thinking of banning it altogether, but some are thinking about regulating. So our country, for instance, Bank Negara, had just recently announced that they are reviewing and crafting some regulations surrounding cryptocurrency. the concept of fintech is actually it's a big word. It covers any form of financial technology. So we don't want to regulate the development of financial technology really, because we really want it to fly. The banks as it is a little over-regulated today and therefore is unable to innovate. But the fintechs are where those innovations will come through. And I think in Sweden also, I think the central bank has also come out to say, and the Bank of England has also come out to say, different central banks around the world have said that they're going to come out and look at cryptocurrency. The other thing is in Malaysia, and as in many other jurisdictions, what central banks have done is establish sandboxes for financial services players to come and test financial services product within a safe environment. What these central banks are trying to do, like in Malaysia, in Singapore, is to not apply existing rules to these new ways of doing things. So they allow us to come and kind of play in the sandbox, and then they will craft regulations to support these new ways of doing things. So it's still very much in the infancy stage. In Malaysia, I think we have 6 now in the sandbox, and I think Singapore has a few as well. Yeah. So the regulations will move along as inventions are made.
And just to add to the complication there, in other countries, so for example in the US, the question is a cryptocurrency, what is it? Is it a security? If it's a security, the SEC takes jurisdiction. But if it's a commodity, then the CFTC takes jurisdiction. And then, but is it a currency? Then yet another body takes jurisdiction. So it becomes much more complicated than just even a single bank. And then multiply that by all the different jurisdictions around the world. And that's how complicated. And so the industry is trying to adjust to that. And I think before long, there will be more and more pronouncements in this space. But I think we're overdue with the time. But perhaps any last words?
Well, on your final question, I can just quickly say, to be perfectly honest and blunt perhaps, is that our major issue, I think, relating to this topic of this talk back home is marketing and education. Because when people hear Islamic finance, a lot of people don't know what it is. They think it's religious first and foremost, so they get scared. And that's a big issue, because we know, as we have talked about, that it's more about ethical and sustainable finance than anything else. And the second challenge, as I see it, is complacency. And complacency among regulators, that we have well-capitalized banks in general within the framework of conventional banking, at least in the Nordics, at least in Sweden. So bank regulators and financial regulators, they sort of, well, they think this is not too much of interest because we already have a in their opinion, well-functioning financial system. So to deal with the educational and marketing aspects of this issue, and also to actually point to the potential as to avoid complacency.
Okay, on my part is that I think in the context of a number of countries, the awareness of Islamic finance is there, be it in Malaysia, Indonesia, and a number of countries. But the issue is, how do we develop fintech in those countries, including Malaysia? I think this focus should be on STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. I think we are weak in those areas. I think to be a serious player, Malaysia to be a serious player, we have to really go into STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. This will be the way for the country to move ahead. Thank you.
So go back, teach your children and learn from their children how to use these better as well. So can you please put your hands together for our panel here? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much to our distinguished panelists and our moderator on stage. Perhaps a group photo first. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your participation. Another session later at 3:45 p.m., another interesting topic, and of course for the panel discussion. So please come and join us. And for now, you are all invited for a 15 minutes coffee break. All right, so later, the panel discussion will be on reconceptualizing education for the fourth industrial revolution, and that will be at 3:45 later. Please come and join us. And once again, you are all invited for a coffee break. Silakan.